Welcome to the Veritas Forum, engaging university students and faculty in discussions about life's hardest questions and the relevance of Jesus Christ to all of life.
In these kind of situations, I have a little bit different way of speaking. That is, this is going to be very non-linear. I'm going to keep circling my topic for my 45 minutes, and at the end, you will decide whether I've gotten anywhere close to the bullseye or not. So what I'm going to do for the first 20 minutes is start throwing pieces out there, and then we'll see if we can put them together. Truth in advertising is really important in one of these deals. I am unabashedly a follower of Jesus Christ, whom I claim to be Lord. You need to know that about me. You need to know I went out and spent 40 days in silent prayer with 3 hermits. I am something of a mystic. You need to know that yesterday I did the funeral for a boy who died of leukemia 3 days after his 7th birthday. And however I proclaim Christian faith, I have to do it in light of those hard facts. And I love conversation. If there weren't so many of you here, we would do this a little differently. But the way we're going to do it is I'm going to talk. And then we're going to stop and you're going to talk. And when Jack said your toughest questions, I hope that you will ask the hard questions. I love conversation and want to have it with you. Okay, let me start putting the pieces together. By the way, in a moment I'm going to ask for 4 volunteers. This is actually going to be audience participation. And if you volunteer, you get registered for a trip to Hawaii or something. I don't know. Whatever it is we're giving away here. Let me test your stereotypes. Let's see how good you are with stereotypes. Who's better at math? You didn't listen to the whole question. All right, behave. All right. Who's better at math, men or women? What ethnicity is better at math? So the question is, what happens when an Asian woman takes a math test? Now, there's actually some wonderful research on this. This is a math test that is going to be at the very edge of the person's ability to do. And so it's going to create great stress. And so, first of all, you give Asian women this test and you get a baseline score. Then you do it again, and this time, before she takes the test, you give her subtle cues to remind her of her gender. And guess what happens to the scores? They go down. You then take another group and you give her gentle cues to remind her of her ethnicity. And guess what happens to her scores? They go up. Now, is that fascinating research or what? Piece number 1. I'll give you another one of those of that same piece if you like that kind of thing. White men taking an athletic test. You get this baseline. And then before you give them the test, you tell them it measures your innate athletic ability. Guess what happens to their performance? It goes down. Because everybody knows white men can't jump. Instead, you tell them the test is about their strategic sports thinking. guess what happens to their scores? They go up. Now, that is actually fairly important research for those of us who are educators because it has something to do with stereotype threat. It has to do why certain groups tend to underperform at university. And those of us who teach have got to try to do something about that. But they're also important in another way, which I'm going to try to illustrate. Okay, now I'm ready for my 4 volunteers. Can I have 4 volunteers? Okay, come on. Let me have 2 first, and then I'll get 2 more in a minute. Okay, come on. Somebody nearby. No, I got the guy behind you. Okay. Can they use this microphone? Cool. Thanks. Okay. Tell me your name.
Michael Reed.
And your major is?
Political science and sociology.
Oh, cool. Okay. All right. Come over here. You too. Okay. And your name is?
Paul.
Paul, and your major is?
History.
History. Okay. Now, what I want you to do is stand where you're not looking at the board. Okay.
Okay.
And when I'm going to have you look at the board one at a time in a moment. And when you look at it, there are going to be 2 sets of figures. And Paul, I'm going to ask you to read the top set of figures. And was it Mike?
Yes.
I'm going to have you read the bottom set of figures, okay? All right, so just stand there until I tell you to turn around. Now, I know you're not going to be able to see this real well, but you'll see what's going on here pretty quick. Okay, now, come over here. Now, I don't want you to think. I just want you to turn around and read the top row. You got it? All right, read it.
12.
Top row. It didn't seem that complicated. Okay. A, B, C. Very good. Go stand over here for a moment. Don't go away. Okay. Okay. Come over here. Okay. When you turn around, I want you to read the bottom row. Bottom row. All right.
Okay.
You ready?
Yeah.
All right. Turn around.
12, 13, 14.
Very good. Okay. Now, hold on to that for a minute.
Okay.
Both of you look at the board. It's the same figure. Why didn't you read that A13C?
Because there's a letter before it and a letter after it.
Right.
Right.
Why didn't you read that 12B14?
Because there's a number before and number after.
Okay, but they are the same figure, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you interpreted the figure in light of
The surroundings.
the surrounding that were there. Very good. Sit down. Thank you. Okay. I need 2 more volunteers real quick. Okay, all the way at the back. Okay, what I want you to do is I want you to step outside for a moment. You'll only be there for a minute, so I don't want you to hear what's going on, and then we'll call you back. Okay, so somebody else. Let me have a young lady. Yes, come up here, please. Okay. Oh, I'm nervous too. Okay. I hate to be nervous all by myself, so thank you. Your name is?
I'm Callie,
Callie. What's your major?
psychology.
Oh, okay. I'm intimidated. All right. Okay. I'm getting ready to give you a fact.
Okay.
Okay, now you have to trust me that what I'm getting ready to tell you is true. It really is true. Okay. And what I want you to do is very quickly give me your best explanation
Oh, no. Okay.
of the fact that I give you, okay?
Okay.
Okay. If you take the 4,000 some odd counties in the United States, the ones that have the lowest incidence of liver cancer are sparsely populated, rural, southern, midwestern, western counties that vote very heavily Republican. Now, what I have just given you are true facts. How do we explain the low incidence of liver cancer in those counties?
They don't drink alcohol?
Okay, that's a possibility, right?
Yeah.
Okay, they're good Republican Christians out in the country, and so they don't drink alcohol. Okay, very good. Now, I want you to stand right there. Can I get my other volunteer back in here? Okay, now, you can't say anything until I tell you to. Okay. Okay, run up here real quick. Okay. Why are you bringing your bullhorn?
Well, they said I could use it.
Okay. Use this instead.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay.
Hi,
Your name is?
I'm Breck
Okay.
Galini.
And your major is?
Theater and media production.
Why couldn't I have guessed that? Okay. Okay, here we go. I am going to give you a true fact. Are there other kind of facts? I'm not sure. Okay. You're going to have to trust me that the story I'm getting ready to tell you is absolutely true. And what I want you to do is give me the most plausible explanation for the fact that I'm going to give you. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Of the 4,000 counties in the United States, the incidence of liver cancer is highest in counties that are rural, sparsely populated, in the South, Midwest, and West, and vote heavily Republican. How would you interpret the fact that they have the highest rate of liver cancer in the country?
I would say that in those societies, it's more acceptable to hang out at bars and drink
Yeah.
during work hours, typically.
Okay. Okay, so we got clean living over here. We got bar hopping over here. Okay. What you don't know is the counties that I described to you also have the lowest incidence of liver cancer.
Oh, gosh.
Now, now that you've heard that, what do you think about your explanation?
I don't know.
Okay. All right. You can both go sit. Okay.
My explanation
Thanks.
was better, right?
No, it was not better. Are you puzzled? Oh. Some of you aren't. The folks in here who've had statistics aren't puzzled at all. You immediately know what's going on here. Because the only relevant piece of information that I gave you was sparsely populated. Because when you're counting very small numbers, you'll always get far more extreme answers than you will when you're counting very big numbers. Always. That's why those counties have the lowest incidence of cancer and also have the highest. For instance, imagine a county that only has 3 people. If one of them happens to have liver cancer, they've got a 33% liver cancer rate. If there are 3 people and none of them have liver cancer, then they have a 0 rate. And so you're going to get far more extremes. Now, you're probably wondering why that matters. Let me see if I can show you. Okay, we're here near LA. I understand you have 2 relatively good basketball teams. Which is one more than you used to have. All right, so we're heading in the right direction. I got in trouble with my own class on this. I said, okay, let me give you a fact. There is absolutely no such thing as a streak shooter in basketball. It absolutely doesn't exist. The claim about streak shooting, that is, if you make 2, you're more likely to make the 3rd one, that's a mathematical claim, and it's testable. And it's been tested. And there are no streak shooters. Every shot is a discrete event. And players shoot the same percentages on the fourth shot when they've made three as they do when they've missed three. There's absolutely no such thing as a streak shooter. I had a young woman who was a basketball player in my philosophy class where I pointed out that fact. And she says, I want to see the study. I said, okay. So we looked it up and I showed it to her. And she says, okay, for my project, I want to try to convince the basketball team that this is true. And I said, great project, go for it. So she comes back, she hands me her paper, and I said, okay, I'm anxious to read this, but I have to know, how did it go? She said, I convinced no one. I said, okay, anything else? And she said, yes, the whole basketball team hates you. I thought, okay, what is this kind of resistance? Okay, now let me start to pull pieces together. Those first studies. Oh, maybe I'll hit you with one more. Behavioral economics study. Behavioral economics is a really interesting field. For years, economics was based on the notion of the rational consumer. Do you see anything wrong with that approach? Anything about your consumption you would regard as rational? What behavioral economics tries to do is instead of assuming the rational consumer, they look at the way consumers actually behave. A lot of interesting studies. One that I found really interesting is they give this test where people are rewarded monetarily for how well they do, and then they encourage them to cheat and create an atmosphere where they can. All right, and so they get a baseline for how much cheating takes place. That's their control group. Then they do two other groups. With one group, before they take the test, they ask them to talk about something inconsequential like the last 10 movies they saw. And then with another group, they ask them to write as many of the 10 commandments as they can think of, and then take the test. And guess what happens to the group that's asked to write the 10 commandments? Their cheating goes way down. And it doesn't matter how many they can remember. The cheating goes down whether they can only remember 2 as opposed to 10. Interesting, isn't it? Okay, so let me offer some quick interpretations of what I've done to this point and then get to my topic. We all have stories that we carry around inside us. Part of my story is I am a white male, and so I can't jump. But I'm very clever. Or my story is I'm an Asian woman, and as an Asian, I'm really good in math, but as a woman, I'm not so sure. One of the stories most of us carry around with us is the story of the 10 Commandments. And it's interesting that at different points in our lives, we will work out of one or other of those stories. That's why sometimes I'm a really good follower of Jesus because I'm working out of that Jesus story, and there's other times when not so much. One of the reasons why I wear my cross on the outside is because I'm not really advertising I'm a Christian. It just helps my behavior. You know, I always know when I do this, something bad's getting ready to happen. Okay. You know, when I'm in an airport and I do that, nothing good ever comes after that. Okay. In other words, I want to operate out of that story a little more often. That's kind of one point. You notice that when I ask the students to give me an explanation for the incidence of liver cancer in those counties, they very quickly came up with very plausible explanations. We have this incurable need to explain things. And we will try to interpret everything in ways that make sense. We will try to tell a story that makes sense of the evidence. And in this case, I had two plausible stories, both of which were completely wrong. When you do something like this, I have never had anybody say A13C. Not one. I've never had anybody say 12B14. We always kind of interpret what we have in light of the story we're already working out of. That's the reason why it is very hard for somebody who has absolutely committed their lives to libertarian politics to hear any counter story. Because you already got a pattern, very resistant to hearing another kind of story. Okay, I'm here to talk about Christian faith. And I'm actually going to try to say three things by getting into a conversation with my favorite philosopher here for a few minutes, Friedrich Nietzsche. Because I think he's so formidable. Okay, but let me think about these three things first. Christians have a story that they live by. And there are three ways that this can go wrong. One way is I can get the story wrong. The second way is I can get the story right, but fail to live out of it consistently. The third way is I can be so stuck on my story that new evidence that comes in that requires me to adjust my story, I'm unwilling to hear. And so I want to claim that a faithful Christian witness gets the story right, lives out of that story consistently, and refines that story as experience and discussion requires. How am I doing so far? Everybody with me? Okay. And now I want to tell you a tale of two stories. I want to talk about the story of Jesus Christ and the story of my favorite philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche. Those of you who know anything about Nietzsche know he was a turn-of-the-century philosopher. He died around 1900. Most of you know he died totally insane. That doesn't mean he was insane his whole life. He wasn't. Most of you know that the Nazis found him a really handy philosopher. Most of you know his most famous statement. Well, two famous ones. Number one, God is dead. Number two, anything that doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That's all Nietzsche. What you may or may not know is Nietzsche was the greatest critic of Western culture of his time. He was, I believe, the greatest critic of Christianity who ever lived. I believe that you have to be able to answer Nietzsche to be a Christian. He's really sort of interesting. His father was a Lutheran pastor, but died when Nietzsche was pretty young. He wrote this when he was really, really young. Get a load of this. His little brother had just died as well, so he had a brother die in infancy. His father had died of a brain tumor, and this is what he said. I had already experienced so much joy and sorrow, cheerful things and sad things. But in everything, God has safely led me as a father leads his weak little child. I have firmly resolved within me to dedicate myself forever to his service. May the dear Lord give me strength and power to carry out my intentions and protect me on my life's way. Like a child, I trust in his grace. He will preserve us all that no misfortune may befall us, but his holy will be done. All he gives I will joyfully accept, happiness and unhappiness, poverty and wealth, and boldly look even death in the face, which shall one day unite us all in eternal joy and bliss. Yes, dear Lord, let thy face shine upon us forever. Amen. You could read that in church, as long as you don't tell who said it. Now, needless to say, the way it started is not the way it finished. Nietzsche lost his faith, and he lost it completely. And in the process, he presented an alternative view of reality, an alternative story that is very powerful. And there are 2 points in that story that I want to kind of lay out here for a few minutes. The first one is called the will to power. And Nietzsche believed that human beings, by their very nature, were made to dominate, to achieve, to assert themselves, and that the great sin of Christianity was that it emphasized weakness instead of strength. Nietzsche was a thoroughgoing evolutionist, and so it didn't take much thinking for him to know that if you kept catering to the weak, what you were going to get is more and more weakness. And what you needed instead was for the strong to run over the weak. We get rid of the weak, and that way you keep getting stronger and stronger and stronger until eventually you get to a new kind of humanity entirely, which he called the Übermensch, which unfortunately translates into English as Superman. Has nothing to do with Clark Kent. So he wanted to breed up. And he says humans are not fully human, and yes, unless they are asserting their power. And in that sense, he has become the philosopher of our age. Because the primary story out of which we live today is the story of fear and power. You have to be afraid, and the only way to deal with your fear is to get enough power so nothing bad can happen to you. Okay, this is a great speech for an election year, because all the political candidates are going to have exactly the same message. And that message is this: you better be afraid. You better be afraid. And there is only one thing that can protect you. And you better vote your own interest, which is to vote for me. You better vote for the person who's going to protect your interest, because there are people out there to get you, and you'd better seize to the power to protect yourself. It's the gospel according to Nietzsche. It is the story that drives our world. It is the story that has brought us to the brink of utter disaster. Part 2 of the story. Nietzsche particularly hated Christianity because he thought it denied life. The strangest part of Nietzsche's philosophy is this notion of eternal recurrence. And it's hard to know exactly where he got it or what he's doing with it, but this much is clear. He wants you to live your life in such a way that you could will that every moment of your life would recur eternally. Everybody with me? Okay, so in my 8 o'clock introduction to philosophy class, 8 in the morning, I assume that students here, like the students at ACU, you live the existence of vampires. Okay, you're active in the night, but in the day you crawl back into your coffin for several hours sleep. Okay, I assume that works that way here too. So they come dragging in at 8-something. One of my student evaluations, one of the questions is, does the teacher start the class on time? And I said, well, how would any of you know that? As far as I can tell, I was the only one here when class started. And I come to Nietzsche and I say, can you will that this moment at 8 o'clock, when you've dragged yourself out of bed and sitting here listening to a philosophy lecture, do you want this moment to recur eternally for the rest of your life? What Nietzsche is saying is, you have to have a way of looking at life that says, I will this life. And you see, what Christianity does is it denies this life, and it's only concerned with the afterlife. And that's one of the primary reasons he hated Christianity. And I want to take a shot at answering his story on both points really quickly. As a follower of Jesus Christ, I believe that the story of fear and power is just wrong. That the story Jesus Christ taught us is the story of self-giving, self-sacrificing love. And that we are empowered to do that because there is nothing to fear. One of my favorite passages to teach my freshmen is Revelation chapter 13, which ends with this statement about one of the beasts. It says, you know, you got to mark his name or the number of his name. His number is 666, and I like that because, you know, there's been lots of stuff written on that. And you know, I even do this thing where I prove to them that 666 is the number of Barney the dinosaur. And if you work hard, you can make those numbers work. But if you read the passage, who the beasts are is perfectly clear. It couldn't be clearer. The first beast is the Roman Empire. And the second is the cult of emperor worship that proclaims him to be God. And so he comes to the end of the chapter and he says, okay, let me reveal to you who the Roman emperor is. His number is that of man. 666. He's a man. He's just a man. He's an ordinary man. And like all things human, he's passing away. And the kingdom of heaven remains. I got the call from my money manager a couple of years ago that some of you did. Said, okay, I guess you've seen what's happened to your investments. I said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I have. She said, I just wanted to make sure you weren't getting ready to jump off a bridge. I said, we live in Abilene, Texas. That would be a poor choice. I said, in Texas, it would be better to shoot ourselves. Guns are cheap and plentiful there. And I said, you know, we just don't know each other well enough. I have not thought of suicide a single time. I've thought of homicide continually. So maybe I'll just stay on your side of town till you have a different kind of news to deliver. And then I said, there is some stuff I'm worried about, but that's not one of them. Because my accounts have a number. And that number is 666. Because like all things human, it's passing away. Okay, so the whole economic system didn't melt down this time. If we manage not to blow ourselves up long enough, it will. And you can either live the story of fear and power, or you can believe the Jesus story and believe that the way of self-sacrificing love is the way to have a peaceful world, a world where the kingdom of God enters in. And you can do that because you believe God's got you. The second part of the story is tougher. Because so much of Christianity has been, in my opinion, life-denying. We're just kind of hanging out here, waiting for pie in the sky when we die by and by. And I take Nietzsche's critique very seriously. There has to be a way, if you're going to be a Christian, of affirming life as fully as Nietzsche did. Okay, I've got it on my mind. did a funeral for a 7-year-old. People prayed passionately for him to be healed. And he wasn't. That's one of those places where some people need to change their story. That is, they've got their story wrong. They got this story of God who is the author of the cancer magic. He was at their beck and call, like a genie in a bottle, and whenever they call on him, he has to rush to the rescue. And that God has little resemblance to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God who is in Christ reconciling the world to himself, who seldom behaves that way. But when I talk to the parents, after all you've been through, if you had it to do over again, would you just say, we want to spare our son and ourselves all this suffering? We'd rather just not do it. And they said, that's not a hard question. Of course we would do it. Because love is worth it. And though we would like to have had more years, when he died, the air was thick with love. And some people live to 80 and never have that experience. And the story I want to tell about God is that he created a world in which such things can happen, but that love wins. It is a world where love can emerge in deep ways that would never be possible without the suffering that's in it. Our learning of patience, our learning of bravery, our learning of compassion, our learning of love is impossible in a world that doesn't have suffering in it. And I think I found a way, like Nietzsche, to embrace this life as the school of love. Okay, let me come in for a landing since my light's on. We come back to my 3 points. First of all, it's very important that as Christians we have serious conversations with one another about what our story is. I have a bone to pick with a church in Florida that thinks the cause of Jesus Christ is served by burning Korans. I think they've got the story wrong. And we need to have deep and serious conversations about what our story really is. And we need to listen to others who may see that story differently. Second, we need to be open to changing our story or refining our story as evidence requires us to. Growing in faith is not a weakness, it's a strength. I do not think declaring that you haven't changed your mind on anything in your religious views in the last 20 years is particularly a badge of honor. It's generally because you haven't been paying attention and you haven't been listening. And it's interesting that if you engage people from the other great world religions, you will find places of intersections in the stories, even though we're telling very different stories. In my particular case, that intersection has primarily been with Buddhism. I read a book by a Christian mystic, Martin Laird, and then I went out for a retreat with the world's greatest living Zen master, Thich Nhat Hanh, and it seemed to me they were saying very similar things about the contemplative life. There was this point of intersection. Now, there's a point where the stories diverge, and you got to make a choice. There are different worldviews there, but there are also points of intersection where we learn in the same way that Nietzsche taught me, in the same way that funerals teach us. And the third thing that I want to push hardest on as I conclude is not only do we have to get our story straight, not only do we have to be open to having it refined, we have to more consistently work out of the story that we say we believe. If we kind of interviewed most of the Christians here tonight, I'm guessing that many of you would express the same story. The real test of our Christian maturity is how often do we work out of that story, and how often do we get captured by the story of fear and power. And Christians have got to have a much more consistent witness to the world. We don't often look like people who believe that the story of the cross, the story of self-sacrificing love, is our story. We often look like people who are very afraid and are grasping onto power. I have taught a really big general education Bible class on the Gospels, and I'm teaching an auditorium about this size, and I'm getting ready to do the Sermon on the Mount, and I'm at this point where I am talking about Jesus' instruction, where he says, you have heard that it was said of old, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment, but I tell you, anyone who's angry with his brother is subject to judgment. So I'm sitting there thinking, okay, how am I going to teach this? And I get this great idea as I'm walking into class. So it's before class starts. I see a student sitting back there, and I go up to the student and I say, can you act? He says, act? He says, what do you mean act? You mean like drama? And I said, yeah. He says, no, of course not. Why? And I said, I need some student to act like they are so angry with me, we are going to try to convince them that we are going to get into a knockdown, drag-out fight. And he decided that wasn't such a big stretch that he could do that. I said, okay, this is what I want you to do. I'm going to make a big deal about telling everybody to turn their cell phones off. 10 minutes into my lecture, I want you to make your cell phone go off loudly. And I'm going to come after you, and I'm going to be really rude and abusive, and I don't want you to back off. This is what I want you to say. And we're going to try to convince the class that we're going to get into a fight. He says, it'll never work. I said, it will if you don't overact. And at no point are you to touch me. Okay. I start lecturing. 10 minutes into my speech, he makes his cell phone go off loudly. I look up, there's this kind of nervous laughter in the room. I slam my Bible shut. I start walking in his direction. I said, was that your cell phone? He says, yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for that to happen. I apologize. I said, what was there about the words, turn off your cell phone, you didn't understand? Those are all one-syllable words. Even though you're an athlete, you should have been able to understand that. And he was great. He didn't raise his voice. He just folded his arms, looked at me, and said, what is your problem? I said, right now you are. He said, I can fix that for you. And he gets his books, goes to the aisle, and starts to walk out of the room. I walk up the aisle after him, and I said, the next step you take, it better be towards me. And he walks and stops right here. We are now standing nose to nose. You could have heard a pin drop in the room. I now have 250 freshmen and 10 teaching assistants who think we're getting ready to get into a fight. In fact, one of my teaching assistants said, we've got some international students who still aren't sure what happened in class that day. And so I throw my arms around the student, I look at the class and say, gotcha! And they don't laugh. They are so disturbed, it's a full 5 minutes before I can get them settled down. And finally I said, okay, let me ask you a serious question. Why did you believe that? Have I done anything in the last 6 weeks that would make you think I'd behave that way? I said, okay, let me explain to you why you believe that. The explanation is actually fairly simple. the whole world is crazy. That's why we are all so defensive, so fearful, so anxious to assert our power that that's exactly the way we expect people to behave. And I got to tell you, I'm in a lot of churches, and Christian people are some of the angriest people I know. And you ask me, what are they angry about? And the answer is, yes. Just kind of angry on principle. And what I want us to do is turn down that fear and power and the anger that goes with it and try living out the story of self-giving, self-sacrificing love and see if our world might have a chance. I still think in our world, the primary stories you choose from are Jesus' story or Nietzsche's story. And as I've showed you, we're carrying a lot of stories around in us, and those stories are hard to change, and sometimes we're not totally aware of how they're operating. And sometimes we're using them to explain things that can't be explained. All that confusion. We just keep coming back to the story and saying, okay, how do I interpret the world through this story? How does it look? How does it work? That's what I came to say.
Hi, Randy. I'm Devin Walker. I had just a point of clarification. I was utterly confused at the part of your speech where you went into your explanation of love, or what you were talking about at the funeral. You said the air was kind of filled with love, and I know no other sort of faith or God that would, I guess, provide for that sort of atmosphere of love. And I really didn't know what you were talking about when you said love.
Okay, let me take another shot at that. Thanks for the question. Often, critics of Christianity complain about the fact that a loving and powerful God would create a world that has the kind of suffering in it that our world does. And the implications of the way the question is framed is they would like to have a world like we have without such suffering. And my argument is you could have a world that didn't have suffering in it, but it would be nothing like the world that we have. Because some of the characteristics in human beings you most admire depend on a world in which there is some suffering. For instance, in a world where there is no suffering, there is no courage. In a world where there is no suffering, there is no patience. In a world where there is no suffering, there is no steadfastness. In a world where there is no suffering, there is not the kind of love that emerges out of that kind of experience. Okay, so all the simpler point I was trying to make, obviously didn't make very well, is that the presence of suffering in and of itself is not evidence against a loving and powerful God, a God who is love, who is preoccupied by love. You would expect to create a world where love could be maximized. That was what I was trying to get said.
Sure. What about some sort of, what about gratuitous evil?
Yeah.
What about evil like the Holocaust?
Okay, now we're in a different thought field because we have introduced human agency in. And so now the question is, would a world where human beings cannot do such things be preferable to a relational God than a world where people can do such things? And I would take the view that if God is truly relational, relationship depends on free will. And if you create human beings with the ability to say yes, you also create them with the ability to say no. A stupid example would be, let's suppose that some of you who are really good at science can create a what are we creating now? They're not robots. Are they cyborgs? Are they androids? Whatever the current iteration is. You create one that looks perfectly human in every way and program it to fall madly in love with me. Now, first of all, I'm not entirely against this. But I'm also not particularly flattered by this love because it is not freely given. Okay, so if God is truly relational, if love is one of the things he cares about, then the ability to love is a choice and implies the ability not to, which means that human beings have the capability of doing all sorts of evil. Now, a full kind of theodicy in the face of evil would obviously take more time than this soundbite, but that's where I would start.
So you think you have a theodicy to offer on that account?
I think you have to have something to offer. Complete set of answers, complete set of questions? Of course not. I'm a thoroughgoing postmodernist. That is poison to me. But you have to offer some explanation of the world if you're going to be a Christian that can say something to the prevalence of evil and suffering in our world.
And you think you have that?
Yeah.
So can you offer a couple of points?
Well, I've offered you a couple.
Which were, sorry, maybe I'm being obtuse.
Okay.
What were the points?
Well, one is that suffering serves the cause of love, which God cares about.
All suffering?
No.
Okay.
Suffering, not all suffering.
Some suffering.
And that a great deal of the suffering in the world is caused by free will, and free will serves the cause of love.
Sure.
A completely satisfactory theodicy would have to do some other things. Again, I can't offer a completely satisfactory one, but I do think that it is going to have to be Irenaean more than Augustinian, which basically says instead of explaining everything in light of the fall, you have to explain things in light of where God is drawing things. And so you would have to have some convictions about the conclusion of this had better be pretty good, which in kind of New Testament scholarly terms these days I would describe as the restoration of all things.
So you think that the restoration of all things, or our sense of the restoration of all things, explains seemingly gratuitous evil like the Holocaust?
I'm not sure I'm understanding the question. I think what explains the Holocaust is the evil that human beings do.
You think that because of our choice, because of free will, that's an aspect. So, but the Holocaust has to prevent some greater good, or bring about some greater good or prevent some greater evil. You think you have an explanation as to what that greater good is, or what that greater evil is?
Absolutely.
I haven't heard
Love.
what exactly is.
Love. I mean, what you're actually voting against is you're voting against love.
What do you mean by love?
Well, if you have a girlfriend?
No, sir.
Oh, shoot. Okay. I assume you have someone in your life you love.
Sure. Yes, sir.
Okay. Let's start there. I assume you experience that as an extreme good.
Just go on, yeah.
Okay. It really does come down to that.
It comes down to me experiencing love as extreme good.
Correct.
Just the feeling that I have.
I'm not quite ready to reduce love to a feeling. That seems a totally inadequate description of love. Mm-hmm. But when you vote against the evil that people do, you vote against all the good that they do. That You vote for a world in which good and evil no longer have any meaning. Now, I believe God could create such a world. He could create a world of robots who are incapable of doing anything but that which is good. But it does not seem to me, well, it's not a relational world, and I'll have to kind of leave it to you whether you think that is a superior world than a world in which relationship can exist. So it sort of comes down to how much good you think relationality is. Okay, all right.
Well, I'll leave some other people to ask some questions.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciate the conversation. Come on up so you'll be ready. Come on up so you'll be ready. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Lauren.
Hi, Lauren.
My impression of Nietzsche is that he spent a lot of his life seeking truth,
Yes.
and yet he didn't find God. Do you think that's his fault? Or, how do you explain that? A person who had all of those resources
Yeah.
at his disposal.
Boy, what a good question. I don't think there are any guarantees in this. And I think it's too easy to explain people who come to different conclusions than I do by saying either that they are bad people or bad thinkers. Because I don't believe that. I know people who I think are good people and good thinkers who come to fundamentally different places than I have on the God question. Now, whether Nietzsche was a good person or not is a bigger problem. Certainly had his faults, but I just don't think there are any guarantees, and I think it is a bit of a mystery as to why people come down where they do. At least I can't explain it. I can't explain why two children who grow up in the exact same household and raised exactly the same way come to very different approaches in life. I guess I am, to some degree, going to chalk it up to free will, but that's not really an answer. That's just observing it. That's what happens. I think there probably is a moral dimension. I think that the tendency to interpret things in ways that support what we already know to be true is fairly deeply ingrained in us. And I think it's very hard for us to accept and consider contrary evidence. And Nietzsche was that way. I mean, part of it, I suppose, was his gathering insanity. But the man became megalomaniacal, by the end of his life. I mean, however, even at the end of his life, he gave up the will to power as a totalizing system. He never wrote that book. His crazy sister brought together a bunch of that stuff and printed it as The Will to Power, but that book never got written, and I think the best explanation is he decided it couldn't be. So he was still refining and working on things, but in terms of the contrary evidence, at the end of his life, he's not very fair with it. Now, that's easy to say about him. I think most people would say that about me, that some of my convictions are now so deeply ingrained, it's very hard for me to get leverage on them. And that's the best I can do on the epistemology of belief at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi there, good evening. My name is Basil Chong. Okay, so you talk about two stories that we seem to define our worldview. On one hand, we have the story of Jesus Christ, which is a story that I guess celebrates sacrifice and love. On the other hand, you have the story of Nietzsche, which is basically rule of the strong. And now, any reason why, I guess the question is, and perhaps I missed it during your talk, any reason why we should decide to follow one story over the other? I mean, perhaps coming from devil's advocate point of view, what's wrong with Nietzsche's philosophy of rule of the strong? Or, maybe we could say, it leads to things like the Holocaust, and that's just wrong. But do we have anything else other than it's just wrong and we refuse to have anything to do with it?
Yeah, I think one part of the decision could be what we might describe as pragmatic, and it is one of the ways that we think about truth. That is, what are its consequences, or how does it play itself out in the world? That's one of the ways we experiment and test claims to truth. I think we'd also want to think about other ways that you test the truthfulness of claims. That is, you would want to look something like at something like the historical case that can be made for Jesus, and is it credible to believe he is who he claimed to be and has the authority to speak to such issues, which is a path I didn't pursue tonight. That's for another time. And then I'd also want to ask if there are ways of testing Nietzsche's claims about what are true. And it actually is a fairly complex problem as to how you falsify certain ideas. For instance, if I put it to the Christians here tonight to define precisely what it would take to falsify your view, most of the Christians here tonight would not be able to precisely state what that set of conditions are. In the same way, those who have a different set of beliefs here tonight probably also cannot precisely say what it would take to falsify their beliefs. And so, okay, that's kind of a truncated answer, and we probably don't have the time to pursue the cases of falsification tonight. But anyway, you get the idea.
Okay, so perhaps just what is the strongest reason to choose one over the other? I mean, you've obviously chosen to try and live the story, operate in the story of Jesus.
Okay, let me think for a minute, decide if I want to be honest. If you wanted to know where I tied my own rope, and this is not for you, this is for me. I tie my own rope in my Christian mysticism. I tie my own rope in my experience in the desert, experiencing the truth that God is love. And I don't think that's the way you do it, but I don't think, I'm kind of rejecting the modern notion that you can stand out here as an objective observer, look at 5 different worldviews, and coldly select one. I just don't think that's the way we do it. I think we do it in a more interior way, and so part of it is going to be the act of experimentation. You almost have to see what it looks like from the inside. Now, it doesn't say you have to try every brand on the market, but it does say it's something other than just kind of cold equations.
So it's a little more subjective than just looking at it from the outside.
Anybody who thinks it's objective is profoundly confused. Yeah, they're confused about their subjectivity. Everything we know as human beings, we know as human subjects.
All right.
And so, sure, it's subjective. Yep.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much.
Yep.
Hi, my name is Colin Cowart, and I have 2 questions, if that's all right. My first one is, if Jesus Christ did not rise from the dead, would that make Christianity a worthless religion?
Well, I don't know about worthless religion. I think it would make it untrue. And I think that if you follow Paul, he would say if Christ hasn't been raised, then Christians are sort of pathetic or pitiful because we say he's been raised when he hasn't. So I would say that the resurrection of Jesus Christ is absolutely central to the story, and that Christianity that does not include that resurrection is not what I would think of as the Christian story.
Well, that brings me to my second question, which is that Considering that the events that are given in the Gospels, such as miracles, such as people rising from the dead, that anyone today who claims to have seen these things is considered crazy by society, maybe even most Christians. How can we believe the claims of documents that have been dragged through millennia that make these outrageous claims?
Yeah. The claims are at least what do we say, counterintuitive or counter our primary experience. But at least logically speaking, in order for a miracle to be a miracle, that's what it has to be. Are you with me?
Yeah.
That is, the reason that you can see the black on the board is because it's mostly white. Okay, so for a miracle to emerge at all, there has to be this background of natural consistency, or you wouldn't be able to identify a miracle as a miracle. So by its very nature, it is counter to our common experience. Now, I guess my question would be, ancient people weren't scientific, but you shouldn't jump to the conclusion that they were stupid. Okay. They understood that when people died, they didn't get better. Okay. They understood that. And so I think that what you would do is you would take the claims and do research on them. You know, if somebody today claimed that somebody was down the road curing cancer, my first reaction wouldn't be to believe that, but nor would my first reaction be to say that's impossible. I think the world's more mysterious than that. I would want to go investigate it. Now, I think that there are many Christians who are too gullible and they want to supply explanations for things that are random in the same way as the explanations for the liver cancer statistics. On the other hand, there are those who have so bought into a modernist view. There are credible claims for miracles in the third world that happen all the time. There are many credible claims. And so I don't want to just, say, well, I know that didn't happen. So what I try to tell my students is, there's never been a time in my life when I have been more open to things that I once would have thought impossible. And there has never been a time in my life when I have been more skeptical about the claims that people make. And my question is it possible to be both at the same time? Can you be open and skeptical? And so I want to do serious critical thinking. I don't want to be gullible for every snake oil salesman. And at the same time, I don't want to reject notions out of hand because they're outside my ordinary experience. It's the best I can do.
A quick follow-up, if that's all right. It seems to me that if something is outside of nature, like a miracle, then that itself, if we can come up with an explanation for it, would then be inside nature. But the reason things are called miracles, it seems to me, is because we as humans have no explanation for them.
That's right.
All right, great. Thank you.
Okay. One more question. Maybe two more if it would create peace.
I'm taking an Old Testament class.
Yes?
Under Professor Willis over there.
Then ask him.
Anyways. We were learning in class, and we're talking about the Bible, and we're talking about how...
In Willis's class?
Yeah.
Bible?
It's
Okay.
crazy.
Go figure. All right.
And we're talking about how it's redacted, or edited
Okay.
a lot of times, or it seems like.
Okay.
And so that's the Bible. And the Quran, from what I've heard and from me talking to Muslims, it was Gabriel or God who directly spoke to Muhammad, and Muhammad basically wrote down the Quran. And so it seems like comparing the Bible and the Quran, it seems like the Quran seems more tenable, or it seems more reliable because it hasn't been redacted or edited. And so my question is, why follow the Bible when it seems like the Quran is more reliable?
Yeah. You're fairly far outside of my area of
Okay.
expertise, but
Okay, sorry.
but that's all right.
Is that fine?
That's never stopped me from talking. Okay. So no worries. The person who taught me most about Islam was an Islamic scholar at Syracuse when I was there. And he says, you Christians that allowed the critical study of the Bible, that's the worst mistake you ever made. And what you know about the redaction of Scripture is because Christians have allowed for critical study of the Bible. And no such study of the Quran has been allowed. And so the notion of a pure Quran and a heavily redacted Bible, well, you've got one that's had all the work done on it, and you've got another one that's had virtually none of the work done on it. So I wouldn't make my decision on the notion of a pure Quran and a corrupted Bible. I would think that's probably evidentially not the case.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi,
Hey.
I'm Erin.
Hi, Aaron.
Okay, so I'm really disturbed by the concept of election,
Okay.
and that, not politics, but if I know there's like so much evidence that God really did choose specific people that He wanted, or that would end up coming into His kingdom, and it's not that I disagree with that. It's just that if that is true, then wouldn't that mean that God specifically like created people to go to hell, like with the foreknowledge that those people were going to perish? And
Yeah.
I can't wrap my head around that.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm in a tender area.
Yeah.
All right, because I've got Christians all over the room who are all over the map on this question of free will and election and predestination and those things. Okay, so let me express my own convictions about that. Individual personal election to salvation or damnation is not my view, because I start out with the notion of a relational God. And if people are chosen to salvation or damnation and have nothing to say about it, it's hard for me to see how that is really relational, like the conversation I was having earlier. So I'm troubled enough by that in the story I tell about God, that's not the story I tell. Now, there is another kind of election that's going on in Scripture, where God is utilizing certain nations, peoples, and vehicles to move His plan along. And I think that part's clear enough. But I guess what I would say is you can believe in election and be a Christian, individual, personal election to salvation or damnation. But you don't have to believe that to be in the Christian household. And if you're thinking, I can't be a Christian because I don't believe that, I wouldn't decide not to be a Christian because of that, because that's not one of the things you have to believe in order to be one. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
Non-salvational issue.
It's not to me.
Yeah.
And if it is, then there's nothing you or I can do about it anyway, because we're elected to hold the views that we do. So.
Okay, I agree it's non-salvational too. I just don't want to hide away from it. I feel like I'm ignorant to what people are arguing about.
Well, I think a good theology class where you get a chance to understand the arguments would be time really well spent, and I think you would probably find it faith building to think through.
You should teach here.
Thank you.
Okay, this really is the last question. Okay, since all the others have been so easy, we want to end with a tough one. If evil exists in order to make love possible, and heaven exists with no suffering, how does love exist in heaven?
Let me read all of the. Okay, now I have to do the philosopher thing here. If evil exists in order to make love possible, okay, that's not precisely correct. Okay, for love to be possible, the possibility of evil must exist. Okay, does that distinction make any sense? Okay. There's a lot of different ways I can finesse that. In heaven, the human prejudice of time ceases. So there is no past, there is no future, there is only an eternal now. And so at that point, whatever is forever. And so the state of eternal love endures because there is no subsequent moment when a contrary decision can be made. So heaven is sort of the telos, the end point when the game is over, so to speak. And the possibility of evil would imply some future moment in which one could make a contrary decision, which after the human experience no longer exists. I said that and I wasn't convinced. Okay.
Can we all give Randy Harris a round of applause?
For more information about the Veritas Forum, including additional recordings and a calendar of upcoming events, please visit our website at veritas.org.